You people in work clothes always come in with nothing but dirty pennies. You're just a lazy bum wandering around in the middle of the day, so you can wait till the end, right? You should be grateful we're even processing your stuff, you poor loser. Just sit quietly and wait, scum. When the bank clerk saw me, he looked at me like he was seeing something dirty and said those words. I had come to the bank street after working at a construction site, still in my work clothes because I was in a hurry. But I've been waiting at the bank for over 3 hours now. People who arrived after me have been called up one after another, but my turn never seems to come. Could it be that I'm being pushed to the back of the line just because I'm wearing work clothes? People often judge others by their appearance, but isn't it something else entirely to make that so blatantly obvious? Just as I was about to respond, branch manager Mr. Smith appeared from the back room. Oh my, as Mr. Smith bowed politely to me, the man who had been looking down on me up until now widened his eyes in surprise. Who is this person? He asked. You mean you don't know? When Mr. Smith revealed my identity, the bank clerk's face turned pale. I am John Anderson, 21 years old. I remember feeling empty whenever my classmates talked about their future dreams. When I was a child, they were full of hope, wanting to do what they loved. But my path had already been decided for me. I was envious of my classmates who freely spoke about their dreams, saying they wanted to become this or do that. It wasn't that I had a specific dream, but I hated not being able to choose my own path. On top of that, my dad was stubborn and had a craftsman spirit. When I jokingly said I wanted to be a regular company worker, he shouted, "You fool! You're part of this family. Know your place." My life, where everything was predetermined, felt incredibly dull. I hated that kind of life. My parents who forced their plans on me and the people around me who talked about dreams. So I started living a rough life. By the time I was in high school, my parents' words had become irritating, and I started getting into fights as a way to vent my frustration. People began to treat me like a ticking time bomb, and sometimes I even ended up in trouble with the police. Each time I got called in, my parents would harshly scold me, and I would rebel, creating a vicious cycle of anger and resentment. Around that time, my parents started fighting more, wondering where they had gone wrong with raising me, and our family environment worsened. I hated being at home, so I often crashed at my grandparents' house, who lived nearby. When I was little, I spent most of my time there while my parents were at work. After school, I would spend time with Grandma, and when Grandpa came home, we would eat dinner together. I often did my homework there and took a bath with Grandpa before heading back home. Maybe that's why I still have a soft spot for my grandparents. Most importantly, they weren't as nagging as my parents. Even when I started to look rough, they still treated me like their beloved grandson. Grandma was always gentle, and Grandpa would say, "John is a good boy," like it was his catchphrase. What's so good about me? I would say that bluntly. Embarrassed, they would just smile warmly at me. I think it was because of them that no matter how wild I got, I never crossed the line into truly bad behavior. After graduating high school, I considered moving in with them and helping them out. I even began seriously thinking about going into caregiving if it meant supporting my grandparents. Then one day, while I was hanging out in an alley with my friends as usual, my phone started vibrating in my pocket. At first, I thought it was a message, but as the vibration continued, I realized it was a call. Annoyed, I checked the screen, and there was Grandma's name. Grandma wasn't good with technology and would often call for even the smallest things, like struggling to type a message. I thought she might be asking me to pick something up, so I answered the call leisurely. "Hello, Grandma. What's for dinner tonight?" Contrary to my laid-back tone, Grandma sounded panicked on the other end of the line. I had never heard her voice so frantic before, because she was always so calm and kind. When I asked what was wrong, she replied with a single sentence, "Grandpa has collapsed," stunned and at a loss for words. I heard Grandma give me the name of the hospital before she hung up, saying she had to call others. I couldn't grasp what was happening. Grandpa had collapsed. My confused mind finally caught up with the situation, and I bolted from where I was standing. Being a student at the time, taking a taxi didn't even cross my mind. I just sprinted through the streets. Out of breath and drenched in sweat, I finally reached the hospital room. The moment I saw Grandpa lying weakly in the bed, a cold shiver ran down my spine. Even from a distance, it was clear that his face, usually so full of life and laughter, looked pale and unhealthy. There were numerous tubes attached to his body, and every breath he took made a wheezing sound from his throat. "Grandpa!" I rushed to his bedside, and he gave me a weak smile. "Oh, John." He tried to lift his hand, but it barely moved before falling back onto the bed, lacking strength. I gently wrapped his hand in both of mine. Grandpa's hand twitched slightly, but did not grip back. "Don't look so sad, John." "Grandpa, please don't." I was too afraid to say, "Please don't go." "John, you're a good boy, my pride and joy," Grandpa said, smiling as if pleased, but I shook my head. I wasn't a good boy, just a disappointing grandson. "Live your life however you want. Cherish it." I couldn't find any words to respond to Grandpa's words. Later, my mom and dad rushed to the hospital, but by then, Grandpa had already fallen into a coma. I visited him every day, but he grew weaker with each passing day. His arms, which were once strong from his work as a craftsman, had now become as thin as twigs. Holding his wrinkled hand, I prayed to God, something I had never done before. "Please, please let Grandpa get better. I promise I won't get into any more fights. I'll come back home. I'll be a good boy. I'll give up all my happiness for Grandpa. So please, God, save Grandpa." But my prayers were in vain, and Grandpa passed away quietly. I learned later that he had developed heart problems after retiring. His condition had worsened, and being elderly, he finally passed away peacefully. Grandma, my parents, and I all cried our hearts out. We all loved Grandpa so much, and the sense of loss was overwhelming. After the funeral, I found it hard to visit Grandpa's house. It was painful because going there would make me realize that he was truly gone. One day, while I was aimlessly drifting through life, feeling unmotivated, Grandma called me over, and I made my way to their house for the first time in a long while. In the living room now, with a new altar I wasn't familiar with, Grandma took something out and handed it to me. Work clothes. When I unfolded them, I saw a brand new uniform with the name, Anderson, embroidered on the chest. This was also the uniform of the construction company my dad was running. The company was founded by Grandpa alone and had been passed down to my dad. Dad had always said he wanted me to take it over, which I hated, and I had constantly rebelled against. Seeing my resistance, Grandpa had always told me, "John, you don't have to take over. Do what you want." But Grandma looked wistfully at the photo on the altar. "He secretly prepared it, hoping that one day you might wear it. He understood that I didn't want to take over, but still he had quietly prepared it, dreaming that one day I might wear the same uniform. Grandpa kept it a secret until the very end, and even said I could live my life however I wanted. In the memorial portrait, Grandpa was wearing his work clothes with a big proud smile on his face. He looked so proud and incredibly cool. "Grandma, I've made up my mind. I'm going to become a craftsman who looks good in these clothes." I decided to stop making excuses and running away from my life being decided for me. I knew that both Grandpa and Dad took great pride in this work. I wanted to catch up to them both. With that thought, I decided to work at the family construction company. When I got home, I shaved off the blonde hair I had let grow out. Then, molding the work clothes Grandpa had prepared, I directly asked Dad, "Please let me work." Since I had been rebelling all this time, both Dad and Mom were shocked when I suddenly said that. I told Dad everything I felt about taking over the construction company, about the work clothes Grandpa gave me, and what I seriously wanted to do. But Dad wasn't going to say yes that easily. I knew it wouldn't be simple. So I kept asking him persistently to let me work. Even if he said no today, I was determined to keep asking tomorrow and the day after until he finally accepted me. I wonder how long the back and forth continued. "You'll start by getting to know the site," Dad finally said with a heavy sigh, and I bowed deeply. From the next day, I began working at the construction company as Dad had said. My first job was at the construction site. Of course, I didn't have any specialized skills, so my main tasks were carrying materials. At first, I wasn't useful at all, and word soon spread that I was the CEO's son, so I was treated like a burden. The hierarchy was strict, and every day I got yelled at by the senior workers for being a nuisance. To be honest, there were times when it was tough, and I felt like giving up. But each time I did, I remembered Grandpa's face and held on. I did whatever I could and tried to learn everything I could. As I continued those days, I gradually started to be entrusted with more tasks, and the senior workers began to take notice of me. Finally, the day of my first paycheck arrived. Having barely worked part-time jobs before, I felt strangely excited. Dad teased me, saying, "Don't expect too much. It's not a big amount." But to me it was more than enough. I wanted to tell Grandpa that I'd received my first paycheck, and I had promised Grandma I'd treat her to dinner. Luckily, work ended early that day, and I was told I could leave before noon. So I headed straight to the bank. I had plenty of time before my dinner appointment with Grandma, and I decided I would surprise her with a present. Going home first would be out of the way, so I decided to withdraw my paycheck at the bank before going home to change. Because it was payday, both the counters and ATMs at the bank were crowded. There was a line extending outside for the ATMs, but since it looked like I could sit and wait at the counter, I decided to take a number and wait. It was just after lunchtime, and there weren't too many people ahead of me in line. I thought I could get home and head out within an hour. I sat in an empty seat and killed time on my phone until I was called. I scrolled through social media, replied to messages, and kept myself occupied. But there was no sign of my number being called. The last time I checked, there were only 2 people ahead of me, but now they were calling numbers that came after mine. I wondered if I had somehow missed my turn, so I approached a man working at the corner of the counter. "Excuse me, sorry to bother you. I think I might have missed my number." I showed him the number slip I had. The man glanced at me and immediately wiped the smile off his face. He quickly checked the number and said dismissively, "We're calling numbers in order." "But my number has already passed, right? Should I just keep waiting?" I wasn't familiar with how the bank counters worked. That's why I asked. But the man sighed as if annoyed. "The order of processing may change depending on the transaction details, so please wait at your seat," he said, not even looking at me anymore as he dropped his eyes back to the papers in front of him. Annoyed by his attitude, I couldn't help but glance at his name tag. The plate on his chest read, "Stanley Kelly." I understood that it was busy because it was payday, but such blatant behavior was really infuriating. I hoped that I wouldn't end up dealing with Stanley, so I decided to wait a little longer as instructed. Even though they said the order could change, nearly 10 numbers after mine had already been called. I had thought I would be called soon, but people who got their number tickets after I started waiting were being called one after another. It had already been over 30 minutes since I asked Stanley, so I decided to ask the receptionist in the lobby. The receptionist said they would check and disappeared behind the counter. It had been over 2 hours since I came here. If I didn't leave soon and get ready, I wouldn't have time to buy the present I was thinking of. When the receptionist returned, she said, "We are currently very busy and ask for your patience to wait a little longer." She said this while bowing apologetically. Unlike Stanley, their polite attitude made me feel like I could wait a little longer. I sat back down and waited for my turn again, but in the end, I wasn't called until the bank closed at 3:00 p.m. The new reception was closed, and only those waiting to be called remained. Although there were no more people waiting for deposit withdrawals, I was still ignored as if I didn't exist. It was strange to have waited for 3 hours while the order kept getting shuffled around. I should have just gone to the ATM. However, there was still a long line at the ATM stretching outside. Reluctant to start over there, I approached Stanley again. "Excuse me, I've been waiting for 3 hours now. Are you going to call me soon? You were the one who told me to wait at my seat, right?" Stanley snorted with a mocking laugh. "Probably just a small change transaction, right? It's annoying and troublesome during such a busy time." I was stunned by his suddenly contemptuous tone. "You people in work clothes always come in with dirty coins. Lazy bums like you wandering around in the middle of the day have plenty of time, so you can wait until the end. You should be grateful we're even processing your stuff, you poor fool. Just sit there quietly and wait, you scum." "What did you say, you bastard?" Angered, I grabbed Stanley by the collar, and he let out a pathetic whimper. I almost raised my fist, but in that instant, Grandpa's face flashed in my mind. John is a good boy. Startled, I lowered my fist. "I'm sorry," I said, releasing Stanley. He cleared his throat irritably. "This is why I hate dealing with the bottom rung. So uncivilized. Oh, it's so annoying getting emotional at the drop of a hat with no shred of reason. And to top it all off, no money. What a disaster." It was pointless to talk to someone like Stanley, who looked down on me. As I thought of asking someone else for help, a man in a suit hurriedly approached from the back of the counter, likely alerted by the commotion earlier. The man, dressed in a crisp suit, smiled warmly the moment he saw me. "Well, if it isn't someone from Anderson Construction." "Oh, Mr. Smith. Good to see you." It was Mr. Smith, the branch manager, the highest-ranking person at this bank. I felt a wave of relief wash over me now that someone familiar was here to talk. Stanley, seeing us greet each other, widened his eyes in surprise. "Mr. Smith, do you know this gentleman?" When Stanley nervously asked, it was now Mr. Smith's turn to widen his eyes in surprise. "This is the son of the Anderson Construction Company we work closely with. Couldn't you recognize the uniform of Anderson Construction? Don't tell me you didn't know." Mr. Smith said this, almost daring Stanley to confirm his ignorance. Stanley's face turned pale. "Ha, the son. John, please come this way." Following Mr. Smith's lead, I was guided to a room in the back. I sat down on a fine sofa in the reception room, and they even served me a cup of warm tea. "Sorry to keep you waiting. What were you discussing with Stanley earlier?" Mr. Smith asked apologetically. Stanley, who had been brought along, sat beside Mr. Smith across from me, looking visibly uncomfortable. I explained honestly that I had come in the early afternoon to withdraw money and had been deliberately made to wait. I also mentioned how Stanley had looked down on me because of my clothes and how I had ended up grabbing him out of anger. When I finished, Mr. Smith bowed so deeply that his head nearly touched the table, saying, "I am truly sorry." Apparently, this Stanley guy had only recently been transferred here. While it might be understandable that he didn't know all the clients yet, it was still unacceptable to change his attitude based on the customer. It's wrong to judge and look down on someone just because they're wearing work clothes, Mr. Smith said. "You're absolutely right, John. We deeply apologize," Mr. Smith said, bowing his head, while Stanley only stared down, pale and silent. It seemed like Stanley wasn't even aware that he had done something wrong. He just looked scared of being reprimanded and fearful of the consequences. "I will be discussing this incident with my father." I stared at my words. Mr. Smith quickly said, "Please, anything but that. I beg you, please be lenient. I am so sorry," as he continued to bow. The small construction company that Grandpa had started had grown significantly over time thanks to his hard work. Now, as Anderson Construction, it had become a major corporation handling everything from building projects to public works. Our company's main business partner had been this local bank since Grandpa's time. Even I knew that if we stopped doing business with them, it would be a huge loss for the bank. We take pride in these work clothes. That's why I couldn't forgive Stanley for looking down on them. "Come on," Stanley apologized to him. "I'm very sorry," Mr. Smith and Stanley both said as they bowed deeply in apology. At this point, it all seemed rather ridiculous. "That's enough. From now on, please treat everyone who comes in with the same respect, not just me, but I will still report today's incident to my father." I put the money I had withdrawn into my wallet and left the bank. After that, I managed to get the present for Grandma, and we went out for the promised dinner together. I bought a pair of glasses for Grandpa and Grandma. I placed one of the glasses at Grandpa's altar. I knew that the two of them had secretly continued using their matching bowls as a couple. Grandma loved finely crafted things, and Grandpa loved items made by skilled artisans, so when I saw these two different colored, intricately cut glasses, I thought they would be perfect for them. Since I still couldn't buy Grandpa's favorite alcohol, I thought I'd offer it with this glass once I came of age. Grandma was delighted, and seeing her smile after so long reassured me. When I told Dad about what happened at the bank, he was, as expected, furious. He stormed over to the bank, threatening to end our business relationship. I hadn't expected him to go that far, and to be honest, I was surprised. However, when Mr. Smith realized the bank would be ruined if we pulled out, he pleaded with my father. They reached an agreement. Stanley would be fired, and our business would continue. I felt so disgusted that I decided to close my account at this bank and move it to another one. Grandma and Dad, who had inherited Grandpa's estate, also closed their personal accounts and moved them elsewhere. Even though it was just a personal account, Grandma's account alone involved several tens of millions of dollars, so the bank lost a substantial amount. Rumor had it that after Stanley was fired, not only had he tarnished the bank's reputation, but he was also sued for damages for the losses he caused. Considering he discriminated against customers, insulted us, and ridiculed what we held dear, I was sure he got what he deserved. I couldn't show Grandpa my work clothes in person, but I wondered if he was watching me wear the same work clothes as him from heaven. I needed to make sure I lived up to his words, that I was a good boy and a grandson to be proud of. Grandpa always looked so cool in his picture. I decided to live with pride in my work and in myself, making sure I would never bring shame to these work clothes or to Grandpa.